Pop quiz, what is the most important car to Lexus? I'll give you a couple seconds to let that roll around in your brain. No, technically not the RX. While that is the best-selling Lexus of all time, did I ask you about a vehicle or a crossover? No. Get with the program, people. We're finally talking about a car in a world of crossovers. And the best-selling Lexus sedan over the past 20 years and now 7 generations is the ES. And like, when I say best-selling, this is like a big number. They have sold something to the tune of almost 2.2 million of these things over 28 years. And 1 million of those have been the US alone. And surprise of surprises, this generation is going to be the first one that's going to be sold in Europe. And real surprise, the first one they're going to sell in their own domestic market of Japan. So we're not going to do a tech review of this because it's important to Lexus. We're going to do a tech review because this is an important segment to car guys like you and I, because when you think about this, not just the ES, but the ES, 3 Series, C-Class, cars like that, that's 400,000 units in the US. Not an inconsequential amount when we think about it, but when you compare it against one of their vehicles, the Toyota Camry that sells 450 plus thousand of those things a year, it kind of makes you think that, wow, this is still in existence. That is why we are going to do a tech review. Let's start with what the ES has in abundance, and that is propulsion systems. There are 2 on offer. The first one is going to make its way into 85% of total global ES production. That is a 3.5 V6, good for 302 horsepower, comes in at 6,600 RPM. Not great, but not bad. Then there's the torque, 267. That comes in at 4,700 RPM. That's a bit of an ouch, but that number should also be a reminder of a car that's very similar to this that we recently drove. Then there's the second propulsion system on offer, and it's really 2 propulsion systems on one. It's a 2.5 4-cylinder. It's good for 176 horsepower, comes in at 5,700 RPM, and then the torque, 163, comes in at 3,600 RPM, stays flat all the way to 5,200. But there's an electric motor that goes with this, actually 2 to be exact, which brings the total system horsepower to 215. Now, my thinking is we need to have 2 full first drive reviews. We'll drive this one first, then take a break, go to a cool car, and then come back to the hybrid, so come back for all 3 episodes. Inside there's a mix of what we're familiar with and then what's new for the ES application. Let's start with what we're familiar with. In one look, and here you can clearly tell, it's been inspired by the LS, which was inspired by the LC, which in turn was inspired by the LFA. And that's very much in part to Suga-san, who is now the general manager of all of Lexus design, not just the LS, so big congratulations to him. And what they've done, you look here, and clearly the housing around the instrument cluster is directly taken from the LFA, and here it works very well. That's when we get into what's new for the ES. This isn't like the nesting doll syndrome where you take one design and you make it in 3 different sizes. Here, yeah, this is the same as what we saw in that LS most recently, but then this, it's been adapted for the ES. But most importantly, while they've taken general kind of shapes here from other Lexus designs, they've changed something, and it's something that's very subtle. Look at the trim pieces, the way all of this comes together. It's specific for the ES. Even the shape of the top of the dash is specific for the ES. And this is a big thing in terms of tactile feel, not just design. Like, you get into a $100,000 LS and you expect the tactile feel to be really good in all places. Here, the trip down market, you don't give up a hell of a lot in tactile feel, and this is a huge testament to Lexus engineering as well as Lexus design. Then they've taken some stuff that they just flat out pilfered, and that's the steering wheel that comes directly from the LS, which is a good thing. And then they finally have added something that you and I have been pissing and moaning for a long time, and that is Apple CarPlay. We saw it in the Toyotas we drove, what, a month and a half ago. This is the first application in Lexus. And then I'm going to geek out a little bit. Love me, the analog clock. Thank you for continuing with the analog clock. I will say something about the integration of Apple CarPlay. This all works, one of the better integrations in terms of usability, but to use it, you have to open up this thing here. For an OCD guy like me, I want to be able to hide it either here or preferably in here. There's only charging in here, not a USB port. It's only up here. Then they've added some texture to places you wouldn't expect, like on the armrest. The texture is there. It almost looks like a sword. It's kind of an interesting idea. And then last, but certainly not least, you're going to see this in a coming Living With episode in the LS 500 F Sport. The seat extension works the same here, where you can extend the seat. It's almost like a magic carpet ride where the front of the seat rolls out to give you more support. For someone my height or higher, this works incredibly well. Overall, just a wonderful place to be, especially with the panoramic sunroof. Here we stumble into a lot, so let's begin with the basics. Up front, McPherson struts with anti-roll bars. In the rear, trailing arm multi-link, also with anti-roll bars. In the front, 12-inch diameter rotor brakes. In the rear, 11.1-inch diameter rotor brakes. Now, that is the same whether it's an HEV or internal combustion engine like this. Where we get into some differences is the transmission. The transmission in this car is an 8-speed automatic. In the hybrid, it's a CVT. Then we get into some of the wheels. Depending on the trim level or which car it is, meaning propulsion, it goes from 17-inch wheels to 18 or 19s in an F-Sport. While we're on the topic of an F-Sport, that, like the Avalon, is on offer with adjustable suspension as well as some tuning to the sound. Now, a little programming note here. We're not going to drive the F-Sport in the first drive review of this. What we're going to do is going to wait and drive that back at Moto Canyon so we have some more time with it, because that is, frankly, the most special version of this car, at least to you and I. Then moving on, some construction stuff. So we're going to talk more about laser welded screws and adhesives in the coming full first drive review of this. But something to note, there is some lightweighting going on now at Lexus. I guess they're kind of borrowing a page out of the Hyundai and Kia playbook in that, yes, there's high-strength steel and some great ways to get the thing put together, literally screw it together a different way. But up front, namely the hood and the fenders, are aluminum. The rest of the car, at least parts of the body panel, steel, and then high-strength steel in most of the parts that take the load bearing. Actually, it's interesting, the load bearing parts are the ones that are the most connected with adhesives. So, kind of surprising, I just said adhesives, lasers, and aluminum in a Lexus ES, which my 80-year-old aunt drives. And now back to the hangar to discuss some rather important numbers. Why don't we start with dimensions? 113-inch wheelbase and overall length, 195.9. Now, those two numbers are important not just because of their impact on weight, but you speak to Lexus and they swear up and down this car competes with the likes of a C-Class and a 3 Series. Now, I totally get that from a money perspective, but I don't know if I buy the whole story, and if you look at the dimensions of those two cars, it kind of supports what I'm thinking. Like the wheelbase of the C-Class, 111 inches, and the 3 Series, 108. Then you go to the overall length, and the delta is even greater. It's 184 inches on the C-Class, 178 in the 3 Series, so you kind of see where I'm going here. Then there's the weight, and that's obviously just as important. 3649 on the internal combustion engine ES350. That's 91 pounds more than the Avalon on which the car is based. Then there's the HEV. Badasan did not give me the final numbers on the weight on the HEV, but he did say it's going to be somewhere in the 3,700 pound range, maybe a little bit over 38, depending on which model it is, like the fancy one, which maps right to the Avalon. Now, what's interesting is the MPG. It's 22, 33, 26 on the ICE, and 44, 45, 44 on the HEV, and that's impressive for this size and type car. Okay, so I will admit it is incredibly odd for a Lotus and Proper sports car guy like myself to find this kind of stuff interesting, but I do for two reasons. Number one, the weight delta between a single propulsion system ES and a dual propulsion system ES is now down to 100, 150 pounds like it was in the Avalon. And that is what? It's only been a couple of years that it used to be 800 pounds difference. So it's a huge shift forward. And then number two is something I thought was a typo. At 44, 45, 44, that, like the engine, is one number off. That highway MPG at 45, it's one better than the Avalon. Now, no one gave me a straight answer about it, but if I'm like reading between the lines, I'm thinking it has to do with the coefficient of drag, because you look at the front of the Lexus, it looks like it slices through the wind a bit more efficiently, but that's one man's opinion. Anyway, that's everything for the tech review. What we're going to do is in a couple of days, we're going to have the full first drive review of the ES350. Then we're going to take a break, drive something a lot cooler, and then we're going to come back and we're going to drive the HEV, and then maybe in a month or two we'll drive the F Sport here at the hangar and out at Moto Canyon. So that's everything for ES for today. Until I see you next time, bis später.